He was the most feared man in Seoul, 4 days from his wedding to the most powerful heiress in Korea. 300 guests, 2 dynasties, 1 empire sealed in blood and obligation. But tonight, the man who never hesitated over anything stood frozen in the rain outside a crumbling apartment building, staring at a sick child through a foggy window, and felt everything he had built begin to collapse. If you want to know why a mafia boss walked away from the wedding of the century, stay until the end. Like this video and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Bum. The letter was 11 words long. Jae Hyun-seo read it 3 times before he set it down. Then he picked it up and read it a 4th time, because he was a man who did not believe in things he could not explain, and this letter was something he could not explain. I resign, effective immediately. Thank you for the opportunity. Nia Adeyemi. That was it. No elaboration, no transition plan, no 2 weeks notice, no handover document, no list of pending items. Just 11 words on a single sheet of plain white paper, left on his desk sometime between 7:15 and 7:42 in the morning, during the 12 minutes he had stepped away to take a call from his legal team in Busan. 12 minutes. She had timed it to the 12 minutes she knew he would be gone. He stood at his floor-to-ceiling window on the 43rd floor of the Black Viper Tower and looked out at Seoul spread below him like a circuit board, all lit nodes and dark channels, everything connected, nothing accidental. The Han River cut through the city like a gray wound. Rain was coming. He could feel it in the pressure behind his eyes. Behind him, his office was silent. The kind of silence that was wrong. He had worked in this room for 9 years, and in 3 of those years, there had always been a specific quality of ambient noise that he had never consciously registered until this moment. The faint sound of typing from the outer office. The particular weight of someone's presence through a closed door. The occasional soft knock that meant a problem had been solved before he even knew it existed. All of it gone. He sat down. He put the letter in the center of his desk and looked at it. He was 41 years old. He had killed men and buried secrets and built a criminal empire inside a legitimate corporation that no federal investigator had ever successfully penetrated. He had negotiated with Yakuza captains and Italian consortium leaders and 3 separate Korean intelligence operatives. He had eaten dinner with senators and signed contracts that restructured entire industries. He was not a man who was supposed to be unsettled by a piece of paper. He pressed the intercom. His new assistant, a young man named Dong Wook, who had lasted 4 days before Nia's departure, answered on the second ring. "Get me her personnel file," Jae-hyun said. "Ms. Adeyemi's file, sir." "Do we have multiple people named Adeyemi on staff?" A pause. "No, sir. I'll bring it immediately." The file was thin. Nia Adeyemi, 31 years old. Born in Lagos, raised in London, educated at LSE with a double concentration in finance and political theory. Came to Seoul 6 years ago. Hired by Black Viper Group's corporate division after 2 rounds of screening that she passed with the highest scores the firm's evaluation team had ever recorded. Promoted to executive assistant to the director after 18 months. 3 years in that role without a single formal complaint, disciplinary note, or performance flag. Her emergency contact was listed as a woman named Adeze Okafor. Sister. The number had a British country code. He stared at that number for a long time. Then he closed the file. He did not call it. The next morning, he arrived at 7:15 as always. The outer office felt like a held breath. Dong Wook had rearranged the coffee station, and the arrangement was wrong in a way Jae-hyun couldn't immediately articulate. Everything was in the correct location, but the order of operations was different, the logic behind it different, and it made him irrationally furious. He went through his morning schedule with Dong Wook and identified 7 errors within the first 25 minutes. Not careless errors, errors of comprehension. The young man understood individual tasks, but did not understand how they connected to each other. Did not understand that the Tuesday meeting with the Daegu logistics team needed to be scheduled after the Thursday call with the finance division, not before, because the numbers from Thursday changed what could be said on Tuesday. He did not understand that the newspaper on Jae-hyun's desk needed to be the print edition of the Jungang, not the Herald, and that this was not a preference, but a function of the specific kind of information Jae-hyun extracted from print layout versus digital. He did not understand any of the 100 invisible systems that Nia had built and maintained and refined over 3 years without ever being asked to, without ever pointing out that she had done so. Jaehyun corrected each error without raising his voice. He was good at that, delivering the exact weight of his displeasure without volume, without theater. People who worked for him understood that his silence was louder than most men's shouting. By noon, he had received 43 messages requiring response or action, 12 of which had already been handled, somehow, by systems and contacts that Nia had apparently pre-briefed before leaving, which meant she had planned this, had set things in motion before the letter, had arranged a soft landing for the work even as she walked away from it. He didn't know whether to be impressed or insulted. He was both, Seb. Serin called it 2 o'clock. Yoon Serin was the kind of beautiful that photographers loved, and ordinary people found exhausting up close, all angles and precision, every feature exactly where it was supposed to be, expression calibrated to project exactly the degree of warmth or coolness the situation required. She was the only daughter of Yoon Dae-jung, chairman of the Yoon Holdings conglomerate, a man whose legitimate businesses were nearly as powerful as Jaehyun's illegitimate ones, and whose political connections were considerably better. The marriage had been discussed for 2 years and formalized 6 months ago. It was a good match on paper, better than good. It was the kind of match that restructured power dynamics, that closed vulnerabilities, that answered questions about succession and alliance that Jaehyun had been quietly maneuvering around for a decade. He respected Se-rin. She was intelligent, composed, and completely without illusions about what the marriage was. That honesty he appreciated. "You sound distracted," she said, before he had said anything beyond hello. "I'm not. Your assistant left." "Yes." The African woman. Her tone was neutral, describing a fact. "Her name was Nia Adeyemi." "I know her name." A pause. "My father's people mentioned it. She had contact with 2 members of the Heola Trade Council last month. Did you know about that?" Jaehyun went still. "What kind of contact?" "Dinner. Nothing documented beyond that." "I'm sure it was nothing." "You brought it up." "I brought it up because you should know, because she's gone now, and you can't ask her." Another pause, shorter. "Wedding rehearsal is Thursday. Don't be late." She ended the call. Jaehyun sat for a long moment. Then he opened his laptop and pulled up the surveillance log from the previous month. He found her at 6:17 on a Wednesday evening, 3 days after the letter. He had not planned to look for her. That was what he told himself. He had simply been reviewing the building's external camera feeds as part of a routine security audit. They rotated every quarter, and he always did a manual review to look for things the automated flagging system missed. And there she was, exiting through the employee entrance at 6:17, same as always, same gray coat, same dark bag over her left shoulder, same particular way she walked with her head slightly forward, as if she were perpetually trying to get somewhere 10 seconds faster. He watched her cross the street, watched her take the subway entrance stairs at Yuljiro 3-Gay Station. He knew the cameras ended there. He went back to his work. At 7:45, he put on his coat and left the building. He told himself he was going for a walk. He hadn't gone for a walk in years. Following someone in Seoul at evening rush hour was both easier and harder than it sounded. Easier because the volume of bodies on the subway provided natural cover. Harder because Nia Adeyemi was not an unobservant woman. She had spent 3 years working for a man whose survival depended on his ability to detect surveillance, and some fraction of that awareness had transferred. He stayed 4 bodies back on the platform. She didn't look up from her phone. She boarded the Line 2 train heading east, transferred at Sindang onto the Yungang line, rode it to Wangsimni, then walked. He had expected her to live in Mapo or Yongsan, somewhere still urban, relatively comfortable, the kind of neighborhood that fit a woman with her salary and credentials. Instead, she walked northeast from Wangsimni Station into streets that narrowed and flattened, where the buildings were older and the signage was in older fonts, and the sidewalks were uneven in the specific way that meant the city had repaired them many times but never replaced them entirely. She stopped in front of a building that was 5 stories and the color of old concrete, with iron railings on the stairwells and laundry hanging from 3 of the visible windows. She punched a door code. She went inside. He stood across the street. The rain that had been threatening for 3 days finally started. It came slowly at first. Large drops, spaced out, almost contemplative. Then it came harder. He didn't move. A light came on in a second-floor window. He could see the shape of the room, a main space, not large, one lamp on the left side. He saw Nia's silhouette move into the frame. She set her bag down. She moved toward the right side of the room and then stopped, and her posture changed. A softening, a dropping of the shoulders. And she bent down toward something below the window's sightline. A couch. Someone on the couch. He crossed the street. He stood on the sidewalk directly below the window. The angle was wrong for seeing in clearly, but now he could see, just barely, the top of a small head. Dark hair. A child's hair. And he could see Nia kneeling beside the couch, her hand on the child's forehead, then on the child's cheek, her movements careful and practiced, the movements of someone who had done this many times. He stood in the rain for 11 minutes. He counted them. He was a man who noticed things. It was the thing that had kept him alive when others in his position had not been. And what he noticed now was this. Nia Adeyemi had worked for him for 3 years, during which time she had occasionally worked until midnight, had occasionally been in the office on weekends, had answered his messages at any hour, and resolved crises before he knew they were crises. He had never once asked her if she had somewhere to be, had never wondered whether the evenings she left precisely at 6:17 were 6:17, because that was the exact moment she had calculated she could leave and still make it home in time for something. For someone. He had simply assumed she went home and the file closed and she was available again in the morning. He walked back to his car. His driver, a quiet man named Hyun-soo, who had been with him for 8 years, said nothing about the rain soaking through his suit jacket. The next morning, he called in a favor from a contact at the National Health Insurance Service. The contact asked no questions and returned information within 2 hours. Kim Zuri, age 6, admitted 3 times in the past 14 months to Seoul National University Hospital's Pediatric Nephrology Unit. Severe hereditary kidney disease with progressive renal dysfunction. Treating physician, Dr. Park Seung-jun, one of the country's leading pediatric nephrologists. Current treatment status, ongoing, outpatient management with periodic inpatient monitoring. Projected treatment costs over the next 18 months, a number that Jae Hyun looked at twice, because it was the kind of number that would have been nothing to him and would have been everything to a woman paying it out of a single salary. He sat with this information for a long time. The child's surname was different from Nia's. Kim, not Adeyemi, not Okafor. He cross-referenced it against the emergency contact in the personnel file, Adeze Okafor sister. Cross-referenced again against Seoul Metropolitan Civil Registration Records, which his contact in the district office could access. Adeze Okafor, née Adeyemi. Deceased, 14 months ago. Cause of death, cardiac event. Survived by 1 minor child, Kim Zuri, registered to the Maternal Household Registry. Guardian of record, Adeyemi Nia, 14 months. Nia had become the child's guardian 14 months ago, at the same time the medical costs began. She had said nothing, not one word to anyone in the organization, had absorbed it entirely, grief, responsibility, financial strain, and had continued to perform her job at the same level, or better, without accommodation, without complaint, without the smallest visible sign that anything had changed. Jae-hyun closed his laptop. He stood up and walked to his window. Rain again today, softer, misting across the glass. Below, the city moved with the particular indifference of cities, crowds of people carrying their private catastrophes in silence, surrounded by other people carrying theirs. He had built his entire adult life on the principle that sentiment was a liability. That emotion was a weapon that other people used against you if you let them see it. He had watched his father destroyed by love, by the wrong love weaponized by a woman who saw it clearly as leverage, and he had decided at 19 years old that he would never make the same mistake. He had been disciplined about it, consistent. He had cultivated relationships that were transactional by design and never pretended otherwise. He had been, he realized, profoundly good at this, and now he was standing at a window thinking about a woman he had employed for 3 years without knowing her name, was in a language he had never looked up. without knowing she had a sister, without knowing the sister had died, without knowing there was a child sleeping on a worn sofa in a second-floor apartment in Wangsimni, while her aunt sat in his office and managed the logistics of a criminal empire with the same quiet precision she brought to everything she did. He picked up his phone, not to call her, to call his financial operations director. "Set up an anonymous medical payment channel," he said. "I'll send you an account number, monthly transfers. The amount will fluctuate. Tie it to the billing cycle. Make sure it's clean." A pause. "For the organization, sir?" "Personal matter." He sent the account information 20 minutes later. The first transfer cleared by end of day. He had not planned to do anything beyond that. He went back 2 days later. This time he brought something. Groceries, purchased from a market 2 kilometers away, so there was no chance of recognition, paid in cash. He stood outside the building for 4 minutes before he admitted to himself that he was going to knock on the door. Because a man who buys groceries and then stands outside the building with them is a man who has already made the decision. He knocked. The sound from inside was a child's voice. High, surprised. And then Nia's voice, lower, saying something he couldn't make out. Footsteps. The door opened. She stared at him. He had seen Nia Adeyemi manage catastrophes without losing composure, had watched her redirect hostile negotiations, absorb screaming executives, and handle information that would have destabilized most people with a stillness that bordered on eerie. He had once seen her take a call at 2 a.m. about a warehouse fire that threatened to expose a smuggling operation, spend 22 minutes on the phone, resolve the situation entirely, and then send him a 3-line summary so clean it read like a press release. She was not composed right now. She was wearing a gray sweatshirt that was too large and dark leggings, no shoes, hair pulled back in a way that was functional rather than deliberate. There were shadows under her eyes that were not from tonight, but from months, the kind of shadows that accumulate. She was holding a dish towel in her left hand because she had been doing something in the kitchen when he knocked. She looked at the groceries, then at him, then at the groceries again. "How did you find me?" she said. Not a question, a statement of understanding. "I looked," he said. "You followed me." "Yes." She processed this. He watched it move through her. The anger, the violation, the exhaustion underneath, both that was too heavy to sustain outrage for long. She settled somewhere that wasn't quite any of those things. "Why?" she said. "I'm not sure yet," he said. That was the most honest thing he had said to anyone in a long time, and he could see that she registered it. Something shifted in her expression, some small recalibration. From behind her came the sound of feet on the floor. Small feet. He looked past Nia's shoulder and saw a small girl standing in the middle of the room, looking at him with the direct and completely unself-conscious assessment that only very young children deploy. She was slight, with Nia's same quality of stillness, her eyes large and dark and evaluating. "Who's that?" the girl said. "Someone from work," Nia said, not turning around. "He's wet." "Yes." "Is he staying for dinner?" A silence in which several things happened that were not visible on either adult's face. "No," Nia said. "Oh." The girl considered this. "We have rice." He handed Nia the groceries. She took them because there was nothing else to do with them. He said goodnight. He left. On the walk back to his car, he became aware that his chest felt strange. Not painful, nothing clinical, but strange. Like a room that has been closed for a long time and someone has cracked the window. He didn't like it. He went back the next night. Her name was Zuri, and she was 6 years old, and she had her dead mother's eyes and her aunt's stubbornness, which was considerable. She called Jae-hyun the wet man for 3 visits before Nia finally told her his name, and even after that she used it selectively, deploying it only when she wanted something specific, with the strategic precision of someone much older. She was sick, visibly, on the days she was having a bad spell, but she was not diminished by it. She colored outside the lines deliberately. She had opinions about soup. She had a system for her stuffed animals that she explained to him in great detail on the second visit, unprompted, while Naya was on the phone with the hospital billing department in the kitchen with the door mostly closed, so Zuri couldn't hear the numbers. He sat on the floor and listened to the stuffed animal system. He could hear Nia's voice through the door. Low, controlled, the same tone she used to manage vendors who were inflating costs. He could hear the billing department pushing back, He could hear Nia not backing down, but also, underneath the professional composure, the hairline fracture of someone who is running out of ways to hold the line. "This one is in charge," Zuri said, holding up a worn elephant. "But she doesn't tell anyone because then everyone would bother her." He looked at the elephant, then at the kitchen door. "That sounds familiar," he said. Zuri gave him a look that was too knowing for a 6-year-old. "Auntie Nia is like that too." "I know. She doesn't ask for help." Zuri set the elephant down with some ceremony. "She thinks asking is giving up." He said nothing. "I ask for help all the time," Zuri said with complete satisfaction. "It works." Nia did not make it easy. She accepted the groceries because refusing them was logistically complicated, and she was too tired for complicated. She did not accept his help with anything else, or pretended not to. He learned quickly that the most effective method was not to offer, but simply to do, because offering gave her the opportunity to decline, and declining was something she had elevated to a form of self-protection, so practiced it was almost reflexive. He fixed the kitchen faucet that was leaking on the 3rd visit, because he noticed it, and there was a toolkit under the sink, and he had nothing else to do while Zuri was sleeping and Nia was making tea. She came out of the kitchen to find him on the floor with the cabinet open and said sharply, "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said, and kept doing it. She stood behind him for a moment, and he could feel the argument she was having with herself. The pride on one side, the practicality on the other, and the bone-deep tiredness that made pride expensive. Practicality won, but it cost her something. He could hear it in the way she went back to the kitchen without another word. He did not say anything about the medical payments. He was not going to say anything about them. If she knew, she would refuse them. And if she refused them, the problem they were solving would remain unsolved, and that was not acceptable to him. He was aware that this logic had nothing to do with business. He was not quite ready to examine what it did have to do with. What? Thursday arrived. The wedding rehearsal was at the grand ballroom of the Joseon Palace Hotel. 300 people on the guest list, a ceremony that had been choreographed by an events firm that handled state dinners. Se-rin was precise and demanding and had approved the seating arrangements 4 times, each approval followed by a revision. Her father had personally reviewed the security arrangements. Jaehyun stood at the front of the empty ballroom while the wedding planner walked through the sequence and felt nothing in particular. The ceiling was 30 feet high and covered in crystal. The flowers were imported. Everything was the correct version of everything it was supposed to be. Se-rin arrived 40 minutes into the rehearsal walkthrough. She was wearing something dark and structured, and she moved through the space with the proprietary ease of someone who had already decided it belonged to her. She came to stand beside him and looked at the room the way she looked at everything, assessing, calculating, finding the angles. "You've been distracted," she said. Not an accusation. An observation made with the same clinical precision she brought to everything. "Wedding preparation," he said. "That's not what I mean." She turned to look at him. Up close, her face was striking. All that precision, all that deliberate composure, and underneath it something he had always recognized as kinship. The same trained stillness that he wore, the same careful construction of self. "I heard you've been going to Wangsimni." The air in the room changed temperature, at least for him. "You have people watching me," he said. "My father has people watching the organization. I have the reports because I will be part of the organization." She paused. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm noting that in the month before our wedding you are spending evenings in Wangsimni, in the same building where your former assistant lives." "There's a sick child," he said. "Yes." Her voice was completely neutral. "I know, kidney disease, the sister died. It's very sad." A pause. "She is not your responsibility." He looked at Se-rin. She looked back at him, and for a moment, just a moment, he thought he saw something underneath the composure that was genuine, something that was not calculation or strategy or the performance of being the woman she had decided to be. Something that was almost afraid. Then it was gone. "Don't let sentiment interfere," she said. "Not now. Not with this much at stake." He said he understood. He did not promise anything. He went back to Wangsimni that evening. Zuri was having a good day. The medication regimen had found a rhythm in the past 2 weeks, and there were stretches now where she was simply a child, not a sick child, not a child under treatment, just a small person who wanted to show him the drawing she had made at school that day. A drawing that was purportedly a horse, but looked more like a cloud with legs. He told her it was an excellent horse. She told him he was wrong. It was an excellent horse, and the legs just hadn't caught up yet. Nia was making dinner in the kitchen. She moved around the small space with the efficiency of someone who had learned to make do with whatever was available. The kitchen was a third the size of the one in his penthouse, and she was producing something from it that smelled better than most things his private chef produced. He sat at the table while Zuri arranged her coloring supplies and thought about Seyrin's face in the ballroom, and about the number he had seen on the treatment billing statement he had intercepted last week, and about the difference between a life that was correct and a life that was real. "She's getting better," Nia said, from the kitchen. He hadn't asked. She hadn't offered information without prompting before. "Dr. Park said the function scores improved by 6% over the last month," she continued. Her voice was carefully steady. "He said if they continue improving at this rate, we might have more options by spring." "That's good?" "Yes." A pause. "I know you did something with the billing." He went very still. "I'm not stupid," she said. "I've been managing your financial operations for 3 years. I know what anonymous transfers through subsidiary channels look like. I know which institutions your organization uses for clean money movement." She came to the doorway of the kitchen. Her expression was something he couldn't read. Not anger, not gratitude, something more complicated than either. "I should tell you not to. I should give it back." "Yes," he said. "But Zuri needs the treatment." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face shifted, not softening exactly, but like a door that has been locked for a long time, moving on its hinges. "Why are you here?" she said. "The real reason, not the groceries, not the faucet. Why do you keep coming back?" He considered the question the way he considered most things, directly, without the comfort of evasion. He had built his entire life on accurate assessment. It felt wrong, suddenly, to deploy that precision everywhere except the places that mattered most. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I think I've been looking at you for 3 years without seeing you, and now I can't stop." The silence in the apartment was the kind that holds its breath. Zuri, without looking up from her coloring, said, "The soup is boiling, Auntie." Nia went back to the kitchen. He stayed for dinner. That night, late, back at his penthouse, the city spread out 43 floors below him like a map of everything he owned. He received a message from his intelligence director. "The Jeolla Council contact your fiancé mentioned. Name is Park Myung-chul, low-level political intermediary. Known association with a federal task force operating out of the Organized Crime Investigation Division. The dinner with your former assistant. We can't confirm what was discussed." He read the message twice, set the phone down, picked it up again. He pulled up Nia's resignation letter. 11 words. No explanation. He thought about timing. He thought about the dinner. He thought about what a woman who understood the organization's operations as completely as Nia did might discuss over dinner with someone connected to a federal task force. And then he thought about her face in the kitchen doorway tonight, and the 6% improvement in Zuri's treatment scores, and the worn elephant that was in charge but didn't tell anyone, and the way she had said I should give it back and hadn't. He thought about the wedding, 4 days away. He turned the phone face down and looked at the ceiling for a long time. In the morning, there would be decisions to make, the kind that didn't have clean answers, the kind where every option cost something real. Tonight, he stayed at the window until the rain stopped, thinking about a woman who carried everything alone and never asked for help, and a child who asked for help all the time and said it always worked, and the particular quality of silence in a small apartment that had felt, for the first time in years, like a place where something true was happening. 4 days until the wedding. He was no longer certain he was going to be there. The message from his intelligence director sat on his phone like a stone at the bottom of a clear pool, visible, distorting everything above it, impossible to pretend wasn't there. Jaehyun did not sleep. He did not try to. He sat in his penthouse with the lights off and the city doing what cities do at 3 in the morning, contracting, quieting, showing its bones. And he worked through the variables the way he always worked through variables, methodically, without sentiment, following each thread to its logical end. Thread 1. Nia had dinner with Park Myung-chul, a known intermediary for a federal organized crime task force. Thread 2. 3 weeks later, she resigned without explanation. Thread 3. She had always had access to more of the organization's operational architecture than most of his senior lieutenants. Scheduling, communication routing, financial correspondence, vendor relationships, contact lists that didn't exist in any official database. She knew which meetings happened off calendar and which phone numbers were never to be called from a registered device. She knew because her job required her to know, and he had trusted her with it completely, without question, for 3 years. Thread 4. He had trusted her completely, without question, for 3 years. He pressed his thumb against the edge of his phone. The screen stayed dark. The logical conclusion was obvious. The logical conclusion was what any rational operator in his position would reach within 20 minutes of reading that message. A former employee with full operational knowledge makes contact with a federal intermediary and then immediately resigns. The answer wrote itself. He had reached that conclusion. He had held it. And then he had thought about her face in the kitchen doorway, saying I should give it back, and about the billing statements he had intercepted, and about 14 months of silence that had not been the silence of someone building a case, but of someone drowning quietly and refusing to ask for a life preserver. He thought about both things simultaneously and could not make them resolve into a single coherent picture. That was new. He did not like it. At 4:30, he made a call to a man named Baek Sung-ho, who handled the organization's counterintelligence operations and who owed Jae-hyun a debt that neither of them ever mentioned directly. He gave Baek the name Park Myung-chul and told him he needed the complete picture. Every contact, every communication, every documented interaction with the federal task force, within 24 hours. Then he went to find out what Nia Adeyemi had actually said at that dinner. He arrived at her building at 7:15. He knew she left for the hospital at 8 on treatment days, and according to the medical records, today was a treatment day. He stood in the narrow street below her window and waited, because this was apparently something he did now, stood in streets below this particular window. And at 7:40, she came out of the building with Zuri wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too large and a hat pulled down over her ears against the October cold. Zuri saw him first. Her face did the thing it always did, a quick, unself-conscious assessment, followed by a decision. She raised one hand in a small wave. He raised one back. Nia looked up, stopped. "Treatment day," he said. "I know what day it is. I'll drive you. We take the subway. It takes 50 minutes by subway, 15 by car." She looked at Zuri. Zuri was already looking at the car, a black sedan, Hyun-soo behind the wheel, idling at the curb. The calculation on the 6-year-old's face was entirely transparent. "My feet hurt," Zuri said, to no one in particular. Nia pressed her lips together. She looked at him with an expression that said she knew exactly what he was doing, and also that she did not currently have the resources to fight it. They got in the car. The drive to the hospital was mostly quiet. Zuri fell asleep within 4 minutes, which Nia said happened every time she was in a moving vehicle, a leftover habit from infancy. She said it without looking at him, watching the city slide past the window, her hands folded in her lap with the particular stillness of someone who is making themselves hold still. "I need to ask you something," he said. "I know." Park Myung-chul. The name landed. He watched her profile, the small tightening around her jaw, the breath she drew and released carefully. "He found me," she said. "Not the other way around." "When?" 6 weeks ago. He knew who I was, knew my position, knew enough about the organization to make it clear he wasn't guessing." She paused. "He said they'd been building a case for 2 years. He said they had enough, and that the question was how it ended. For everyone. He was offering you a deal. He was telling me the walls were closing." She turned to look at him then, directly, with the full weight of whatever she had been carrying since that dinner. "He didn't need anything from me. He said that explicitly. He said whatever I gave him was unnecessary. He was giving me a warning." Jae-hyun was quiet for a moment. "Why?" He didn't say. "I didn't ask." Her voice was flat, factual. "I spent 3 days trying to figure out if it was a manipulation. A pressure tactic, trying to get me to confirm what they had or didn't have by how I reacted. She looked back at the window. I decided it didn't matter. I decided the only thing I could do was remove myself from the situation, stop being someone who knew what I knew inside an organization that was apparently being watched. So you resigned. I resigned. She said it quietly without drama. I wasn't going to testify. I wasn't going to cooperate. I wasn't going to be the person who built the case against you. But I also couldn't stay and pretend I hadn't been warned. The car stopped at a light. Beside Nia, Zuri breathed the slow, deep breaths of a sleeping child, her head tipped against the window. You could have told me, he said. Could I? She said it without inflection, not a question. Could I walk into your office and tell you that a federal intermediary had just informed me your organization was under investigation? What would you have done with that, Jae-hyun? What would the organization have done with me? He said nothing, because she was right, and they both knew it. The organization's standard protocol for information containment was not gentle. He had never applied it to someone who didn't deserve it, but the machinery existed, and she would have known the machinery existed, and she had made a decision based on that knowledge. I protected you, she said. The only way I knew how, by leaving. The light changed. The car moved. He sat with what she had said and felt the shape of it, the quiet enormity of it, and said nothing because there was nothing he could say that would be adequate, and he was not a man who spoke when he had nothing adequate to say. Seoul National University Hospital's pediatric nephrology unit was on the 6th floor of the East Wing, and Jae-hyun had never been inside a hospital in any personal capacity. Only operational ones, the kind where you visited someone and the visit was a message. So the scale of the waiting room surprised him. The number of people. The specific quality of the light, institutional and relentless. The sounds, machines, announcements. The particular subdued register that people use in medical spaces. Voices lowered not from respect, but from exhaustion. Nia checked Zuri in with the efficiency of someone who had done it many times. The nurses knew her by name. They knew Zuri by name. One of the nurses, a middle-aged woman named Jong, crouched down to Zuri's level and said something that made the child laugh. A real laugh, sudden and bright in the fluorescent space. He sat in a waiting room chair. The chair was plastic and shaped incorrectly for human bodies. Nia came to sit beside him after the intake was done. They sat in silence for a while, the specific silence of a waiting room that has nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with the suspension of time. How long? He said. 2 hours, usually. Sometimes 3 if her pressure runs low. She folded her hands again. You don't have to stay. I know. She didn't tell him to leave. That, he had learned, was the closest she came to an invitation. He got them both coffee from the machine in the corridor, bad coffee, the kind that exists entirely to give the hand something to do, and brought it back. And she took the cup without comment, and they sat there in the bad light, while somewhere behind closed doors, a small girl with her dead mother's eyes underwent a process that was keeping her alive. When your sister died, he said after a while. Nia's hands tightened around the cup, slightly, almost imperceptibly. You don't have to, she said. I'm not asking to be polite. I'm asking because I didn't know. I should have known. You were in my office the next morning, he paused. I gave you a briefing document to revise. The silence had a different quality now. I needed to work, she said. Her voice was careful, even. Working was the only thing I knew how to do with it. Standing still was worse. Did anyone in the office know? No. For 14 months. Yes. He looked at his coffee cup. That's not strength, he said. That's something else. She turned to look at him. Her expression was unreadable in the way that meant it was very readable if you knew where to look, and he had learned over the past 2 weeks where to look. Don't, she said. Don't what? Don't tell me how I should have handled it. Don't tell me I should have asked for help. You have never once in your life asked anyone for help. Don't sit in a hospital waiting room and lecture me about self-sufficiency. He almost smiled. I wasn't going to. What were you going to say? He thought about it honestly. That I'm sorry. That you were working for me and I didn't see it, and I should have. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her face. Not forgiveness, not exactly, But something in that direction, something tentative. "You're 3 years late," she said. "Yes." "And you're getting married in 4 days." "3," he said. "As of today." She turned back to the window. The city was gray and bright simultaneously, the way Seoul got in October when the light couldn't decide what it was doing. "You should go," she said. "You have things to manage." "They'll manage without me for a morning." "Jae-hyun, Nia." She looked at him again, and whatever argument she had prepared dissolved somewhere between the intention and the execution. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixed. The other kind. The kind that accumulated in the bones over months of holding everything together with nothing left over. "The coffee is terrible," she said. "Yes." "Why did you get it?" Hands needed something to do. A pause. Then, almost despite herself, "Me too." His phone began at 10:17. First message. Serin's assistant, reminding him of the afternoon fitting for the ceremony suit. Second message, his attorney regarding the Yoon Holdings merger documentation that needed signatures before the wedding date. Third message, Serin herself, 4 words. "Where are you today?" He typed back, "Hospital, personal matter. Afternoon is fine. 30 seconds. Which hospital?" He put the phone in his pocket. At 11:40, Baek Sung-ho called. Jae-hyun stepped into the corridor, away from the waiting room. "Park Myung-chul," Baek said, without preamble. "He's not task force. He's adjacent. Private contractor, does intermediary work. The federal investigation is real, but his role is informal. He's not authorized to offer deals or warnings." A pause. Someone was using him as a cutout. For what purpose? "To deliver information, specifically to your former assistant." Beck's voice was careful in the way that meant what came next was not going to be simple. "We traced the instruction chain back 2 steps. The direction to approach Ms. Adeyemi came from inside the Yoon Holdings organizational structure." The corridor was very quiet. Down the hall, a child was crying. Not Zuri's voice, someone else's child, a higher-pitched sound that faded as a door closed. "Say that again," Jae-hyun said. The warning she received. It was engineered. Someone within Yoon Holdings identified her as a pressure point and arranged for her to receive information. Real information. The investigation is real, framed in a way designed to make her feel she needed to leave, to create distance between her and the organization, to remove her. Beck paused again. "We don't know why yet. She may have known something, or she may simply have been removed because someone anticipated she would become relevant." Jae-hyun stood in the hospital corridor with the phone against his ear and thought about Serin's face in the ballroom. I know her name, the absolute neutrality of it, the way information came to Serin's people before it reached him. He thought about don't let sentiment interfere. Not now. Not with this much at stake. He thought about the wedding, 3 days away. The merger documents waiting for his signature, the 2 dynasties and the power they represented, and the specific, careful architecture of a union that benefited everyone involved, except perhaps anyone who stood at an angle to it. "Find the connection," he said. "Full trace. I want names." He ended the call and stood in the corridor for a moment, very still, the way he got still when something large was becoming clear. Then he went back to the waiting room. Nia looked up when he came in. She read his face. She had always been good at reading his face, better than anyone, probably because she had spent 3 years watching it for information while he spent 3 years not watching hers. "What happened?" she said. He sat down. He looked at her steadily. "The warning you received," he said. "The dinner with Park Myung-chul. It was arranged." She went very still. "Someone inside Yoon Holdings set it up," he said. "Someone who wanted you gone. Someone who knew enough about the organization to identify you as a person worth removing and who had enough reach to manufacture a credible warning and deliver it through a legitimate-seeming intermediary." He watched her process it. The sequence of realizations moving through her in order, each one landing. The dinner. The resignation. 14 months of Zuri's treatment cost nearly bankrupting her, alone, without the salary she would have kept if she hadn't resigned. All of it engineered by someone who had calculated the precise combination of information and fear that would make a woman like Nia Adeyemi walk away without a fight. Her jaw tightened. Her breathing changed. Not faster, but more controlled. The kind of control that comes from containing something that wants to move. "Serin," she said. Not a question. He said nothing, which was its own answer. She looked at him then with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not fear, something colder and more specific than either. The look of someone who has just had the shape of their suffering explained to them and is deciding what to do with. She looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not fear, something colder and more specific than either. The look of someone who has just had the shape of their suffering explained to them and is deciding what to do with that knowledge. The waiting room hummed around them, fluorescent light, the smell of disinfectant and recycled air. Somewhere down the corridor, a cart with a squeaky wheel moved past, the sound fading in both directions at once. "How certain are you?" Nia said. "Beak doesn't bring me maybes." She nodded once, the kind of nod that means understood, not agreed. The distinction between receiving information and accepting what it costs. She set her coffee cup on the chair beside her with careful precision, like she needed her hands empty. "She wanted me out," she said, flat, working it through aloud. "Before the wedding, before she was officially inside the organization. Someone did. We don't have her name on the instruction yet." "But you think it's her?" He didn't answer. "You think it's her?" she said again, not asking this time. The vector came from inside Yoon Holdings. "She has people who report to her independently of her father. She's been building her own network inside that organization for 3 years. I knew that, considered it an asset, a wife who understood power structures." He paused. "I didn't consider what she might do with it directed inward." Nia was quiet for a moment. He watched her work through it, not the personal dimensions of it, not yet, but the operational ones. She had spent 3 years inside a criminal organization's logistics. Her mind moved the way his did, consequence first, then cause. "She didn't just want me out of the organization," Nia said. "She wanted me financially broken, isolated, not someone who could resurface as a problem later." She looked at him. "The timing of the warning, 6 weeks before the wedding, long enough that my resignation would look voluntary and settled. Short enough that I wouldn't have time to find another position at the same level before the ceremony made everything official." "Yes." "She was thorough." "Yes." Something moved across Nia's face that was very close to rage, but contained, compressed into a small, hard space behind her eyes. "Zuri's treatment costs," she said, very quietly. She knew. Whoever built the profile on me for this knew about Zuri. They knew that if I lost the salary, I'd be too consumed with keeping her alive to think about anything else. He said nothing, because yes, that was precisely it, and saying it out loud would not make it better. "She used a sick child," Nia said, still quiet, quieter than anger. "She used a 6-year-old with kidney disease as a mechanism to keep me too busy to be a threat." "We don't know." "Don't!" Her voice cut through, clean and sharp. "Don't tell me we don't know. You know. I know. The only question is what you're going to do with it." The squeaky cart came back down the corridor. The fluorescent light buzzed once, settling. He looked at her steadily. "What I do with it depends on what's actually there. I need the full trace before I move." "You have 2 days." "I know. The wedding is in 2 days." "I know, Nia." She picked up her coffee cup, set it back down. It was empty. Had been empty for 20 minutes. The gesture was purely mechanical, the hands needing something while the mind did the work. "She's going to be watching," Nia said. "If you start pulling threads, she'll know. She's already watching. She sent me to this hospital this morning." Nia looked at him sharply. "Her message," he said. 4 words asking where I was. She already knew. She wanted me to know she knew. A pause. Then, "She's testing whether you'll lie, or reminding me she has eyes everywhere. Either way." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at the floor for a moment, a posture she had never seen on him before, something that was not quite defeat, but was adjacent to it, the posture of a man recalibrating. 3 years, he said. "I built the alliance with Yoon Holdings on the assumption that what we each brought to the table was transparent. I knew it was transactional. I didn't think it was hostile. You thought you were the dangerous one in the room." He looked up at her. "You always do," she said, not unkindly. Zuri's treatment ran 2 hours and 40 minutes. When she came out, she was tired in the specific way she got after dialysis. Quieter, her movements deliberate, the bright energy compressed into something smaller. But she saw Jae-hyun in the waiting room, and her face did the thing it did. The quick assessment, the decision. And she walked to him with careful steps and held up her arms. He picked her up without thinking. She was lighter than she should have been for a child her age. She put her head against his shoulder and said nothing, and he stood in the fluorescent light of the pediatric nephrology waiting room, holding a 6-year-old who was not his and had never been his, and felt something in his chest that had no name in any language he had been taught. Nia watched this from 3 feet away, and whatever was on her face was something she did not manage in time before he saw it. He saw it. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. He dropped them at the apartment and did not go in. He had things to move. He told Nia he would be in contact, and she said, with characteristic economy, that she would have her phone on. He got back in the car and called Beck before they had cleared the block. "How long for the full trace?" 12 hours. Maybe 10 if I pull another set of eyes. Pull them. I want everything by midnight. Hunt. He spent the afternoon in the tower, working through the machinery of the organization, with the systematic focus he deployed when something required complete attention and no room for distraction. He signed the documents that needed signing. He took the calls that needed taking. He attended the suit fitting with Seirin's wedding planner in the building's executive suite and stood still while the tailor made adjustments and thought about pressure points and information vectors and the specific architecture of a trap built by someone who understood him well enough to make it look like an alliance. Seirin arrived at the fitting 40 minutes in. She was not supposed to be there. The fitting was his. She was not supposed to be there, but she came anyway, in a dark coat and the particular posture of someone exercising the rights of someone who already owns a thing. "You stayed at the hospital," she said. "Yes." "All morning?" "Yes." The tailor moved quietly to the side. Seirin walked around him once, looking at the suit with the appraising eyes she brought to everything. She stopped in front of him. "She matters to you," Seirin said. Her voice was perfectly level, no accusation, an assessment. "She's someone I treated badly without knowing it. I'm correcting that. By spending your mornings at a hospital, among other things." Seirin looked at him for a moment, really looked, with the full precision of her attention, the thing she usually deployed at negotiating tables. He let her look. He kept his face exactly neutral, which was a skill he had spent 20 years developing and which he now used against the woman he was supposed to marry in 48 hours. "I want her gone," Seirin said. Very quietly. "Not from Seoul. I don't care where she lives, but gone from your field of attention. When we're married, I want her to be a name you used to know." He said nothing. "That's not an unreasonable thing to want," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not. Then we understand each other." "We understand each other," he said. She left. The tailor came back. Ha-hyun stood still while the final adjustments were made and thought about the gap between what people said and what they meant, and how long he had lived on the right side of that gap and what it meant that he might now be on the wrong side of it. Beck's report arrived at 11:47. Jae-hyun read it at his desk in the tower, the city spread below him in its nighttime configuration. The Han River, a dark band between lit shores. He read it once all the way through without stopping. Then he went back to the beginning and read it again slowly, the way he read documents that were going to change things. The instruction chain was complete. Park Myung-chul had been contracted through a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, 3 layers removed from Yoon Holdings' corporate structure. The shell company's beneficial ownership traced through a sequence of nominee directors and holding vehicles that Baek's team had spent 9 hours unwinding, to a trust administered by a law firm in Singapore that Jae-hyun recognized immediately. It was his own law firm. He sat very still. The Singapore firm handled Black Viper Group's offshore legal structures. It was his, not Yoon Holdings, his. The trust that owned the shell company that had funded the operation against Nia was capitalized with money that had originated inside his own financial architecture. Someone had used his own instruments against him. He turned to the appendix. Beck had flagged the trust's authorization signatory, the person whose credentials had been used to establish the Cayman vehicle 3 months ago, before the wedding planning had even been finalized, before the merger documents existed in their current form. The name was Kang Do-yoon, Jae-hyun's deputy director of financial operations, his second in command for 8 years. The man who had sat across from him in 100 closed-door meetings and who knew the offshore structure's authorization protocols because Jae-hyun had taught them to him personally. He set the report down. He picked up his phone. He put it down. He stood up and walked to the window and stood there with his hands at his sides, breathing through it, the way he had learned to process things that hit the part of him that was still capable of being hit. Kang Do-yoon, 8 years, not Se-rin. Or not only Se-rin, or Se-rin through Kang, which was worse structurally because it meant the rot was internal. It meant someone inside his own organization had opened a door for Yoon Holdings to walk through, and had used the organization's own machinery to do it, and had been doing so for long enough to set up Cayman shells and contractor networks, and carefully timed dinner meetings with federal intermediaries. The question was what Kang had been promised. The answer to that question was probably in the merger documents. He pulled them up on his laptop. 212 pages of corporate consolidation terms, asset transfer schedules, governance structures. He had read them. His attorneys had reviewed them. But he had read them as a man who was entering a partnership, not as a man looking for the place where he was being removed from his own empire. It took him 40 minutes to find it. Clause 31, subsection OF, buried in the governance restructuring appendix, under the header Executive Leadership Continuity Provisions. Language that established, in the event of certain specified leadership transitions, divorce, incapacity, or voluntary retirement of the primary executive, an automatic transfer of operational authority to a joint management board whose composition was defined in Schedule G. Schedule G. He turned to it. The joint management board composition: 3 Yoon Holdings representatives, 2 independent directors nominated by the Yoon family's legal trust, and 2 representatives from the current Black Viper Group senior leadership. The 2 internal representatives were named. One was a position rather than a person, chief legal officer, whoever held the role at the time of transition. The other was a name, Kang Do-yoon. The picture was complete, and it was not complicated once you saw it whole. Kang had been promised a seat at the table, a real seat, structural authority, not the deferred influence he had accumulated over 8 years of loyal service. Yoon Holdings had offered him the thing that Jae-hyun had never formally offered, a guaranteed position of power that didn't depend on Jae-hyun's continued presence or goodwill. In exchange, Kang had opened the architecture, had provided access to the offshore instruments, had identified Nia as a variable worth eliminating, not because she was a threat to the operation specifically, but because she was the person most likely to notice, from outside the organization, if something was being moved that shouldn't be moving. She had spent 3 years watching how everything connected. She would have seen it. So they had removed her before she could. And she had resigned and been financially gutted by Zuri's medical costs and spent 4 months barely surviving, and had said nothing to him because she had believed the warning was real and the danger was real, and the only safe thing to do was disappear. He picked up his phone. He put it down. He needed to think about this correctly. He was a man under active pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. His deputy, his fiancé's organization, a federal investigation that was real even if its use against Nia had been manufactured. He had 48 hours until the ceremony. If he moved against Kang now, Kang would know the trace was complete and would move to cover what could be covered. If he moved against Se-rin or against her family, he would trigger a confrontation that would reach every political contact the Yoon family owned, which was considerable. If he signed the merger documents and walked into the wedding, he was signing over the instruments of his own authority to a board that had been engineered without him. He could not move publicly. He could not move through the organization without Kang knowing. He could not trust his own communications infrastructure because Kang had access to the authorization protocols. He was alone in a way that was new. He had been alone most of his adult life, had chosen it, had built it. But this was a different kind of alone, the kind that comes from discovering that the people you built your world with have been quietly disassembling it. He called Beck again. It was 12:20 in the morning. "Kang," he said when Beck answered, "how long has he been in contact with Yoon Holdings independently?" A pause. We're still mapping that, at least 14 months from what we can document, possibly longer. 14 months. Zuri's treatment started 14 months ago. Nia's sister died 14 months ago. He chose the timing deliberately, Jae-hyun said. It looks that way. Her sister's death created the financial vulnerability. The approach came within 3 weeks of the death certificate being registered. Beck's voice was careful. He built the operation around her specific situation. He needed her gone without noise, and he found the combination of circumstances that would make her leave quietly. A sick child, a dead sister, a manufactured federal warning. 3 elements combined into a lever precise enough to move a woman who would not have moved otherwise. Does he know we've traced it? Jae-hyun said. Not yet. We've been clean. Keep it that way. Nothing moves until I tell you. Nothing. Understood. A pause. Sir, there's one more thing. Jae-hyun waited. The federal investigation, Beck said. The one Park Myung-chul used as the framework for the warning. It's real. We confirmed that before. But we've been looking at the source material, the case they've been building, the documentation they have. Another pause. Heavier. A significant portion of it came from inside the organization. Operational records, communication logs, financial transaction data, material that would require high-level access to extract. Jae-hyun said nothing. Kang has been feeding them, Beck said. Not enough to collapse the organization, not yet. Enough to keep the investigation active. Enough to have leverage. Enough that if he needed to, he could accelerate it. He had heard many things in his life that he had needed to absorb without visible reaction. He had built his entire professional existence on the ability to receive catastrophic information and produce only a measured response. He stood now in his office at 12:20 in the morning and practiced that skill on the knowledge that the man he had trusted most completely for 8 years had been feeding his organization's most sensitive operational records to a federal investigation, holding the trigger like a dead man's switch, positioned to either protect himself or destroy everything depending on how the merger played out. I need a location on Kang, he said. His voice was even. Physical location, current, and I need it without him knowing it's been requested. I'll have it within the hour. He ended the call. He stood at the window. The city was very quiet at this hour. Even Seoul quieted eventually if you waited long enough. The Han River was dark. Somewhere in Wangsimni, in a second-floor apartment with iron railings on the stairwell, a woman who had been used as a mechanism and a child who colored outside the lines were asleep, unaware that the architecture of what had been done to them was now fully visible. He had 2 days until the wedding. He had a deputy who had spent 14 months building a cage around him from the inside. He had a fiancée whose family had provided the blueprint. And he had, for the first time in his adult life, something that was not strategic interest or operational necessity. Something that he could not name cleanly, but that had weight, that had the specific gravity of something real. And it was sitting in a second-floor apartment in Wangsimni, and it did not know that everything was about to... It was sitting in a second-floor apartment in Wangsimni, and it did not know that everything was about to change. He gave himself 4 minutes to stand at the window, 4 minutes to let the full weight of what he knew settle into something he could carry. Then he moved. Kang Do-yeon's location came through at 1:14 in the morning. He was at a private dining room in Gangnam, a members-only establishment that Jae-hyun knew well because he had used it himself for meetings that could not appear on any calendar. The irony was not lost on him. Kang was there with 2 people Baek's team had photographed entering, a Yoon Holdings attorney named Shin, and a man whose face matched a known liaison officer from the Organized Crime Investigation Division. All 3 pillars of the operation, in one room, the night before the wedding rehearsal dinner. Celebrating, probably. Or finalizing. He told Hyun-soo to bring the car around. He told Baek to have 2 of his most trusted men outside the Gangnam establishment within 20 minutes, but to make no move without a direct instruction from Jae-hyun himself. He took off his jacket and tie, put on a dark coat, and left the tower through the basement parking level. In the elevator going down, he checked his phone once. Nothing from Se-rin, nothing from Kang. The silence of people who believed they were not being watched. He had lived inside that silence for 8 years. He knew exactly what it felt like from the other side. The private dining room was on the second floor, accessed through a member's entrance off the main restaurant. The host, a thin man in his 50s who had seen everything and said nothing for 30 years of running this establishment, recognized Jae-hyun immediately and stepped aside without a word. That was the advantage of being the most feared man in the room before you even entered it. He went up the stairs. He did not knock. Kang Do-yoon was 53 years old, heavy-set, with a face that had always projected reliability, solid features, steady eyes, the look of a man who showed up and did the work and could be counted on. Jae-hyun had counted on him 4,000 times, had trusted him with information that could have destroyed the organization if it reached the wrong hands. It had reached the wrong hands. Kang looked up when the door opened. The recognition took half a second. Then the blood left his face in a single visible movement, like a tide going out. The attorney, Shin, pushed back from the table. The federal liaison went very still, in the particular way of someone calculating exits. Jae-hyun closed the door behind him. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the one that was empty. The one they had left empty, he noticed, as if they had known better than to sit there. And he sat down. He looked at Kang. 14 months, he said. The room was silent. I want to hear it from you, Jae-hyun said. Not Beck's report, not the document trail. From you. Kang's jaw worked. He was a man who had been in difficult conversations before, had sat across from dangerous people and held his composure, because that was what the job required. He was trying to hold it now. His hands were flat on the table. Jae-hyun could see the tendons in them from across the room. It wasn't personal, Kang said. Don't. Jae-hyun's voice was quiet, that particular quiet. Don't say that to me. Kang looked down at the table. The organization was going to consolidate regardless. The Yoon Alliance was always going to happen. I was offered a position that guaranteed my continuity. That's all. That's all. You would have done the same. Jae-hyun looked at him for a long time. Long enough that the attorney shifted in his seat and the federal liaison put one hand below the table, which was a mistake, and Jae-hyun looked at him and said, "Put both hands where I can see them." And the man did it immediately. You used Naya, Jae-hyun said, looking back at Kang. You built an operation around a woman's grief. You timed it to her sister's death. She was a liability. She knew too much. She would have noticed. His voice was still quiet. You knew she would notice because she was good at her job. She was better at her job than anyone in that organization, and you used her competence as the reason to destroy her. I didn't destroy her. You took her salary. You took her stability. You took it when she had a sick child to keep alive and no one else to help her. And you calculated that those specific circumstances would keep her too overwhelmed to look in your direction. He paused. That's what you did. Kang said nothing. He had no argument because there was no argument. Everything Jae-hyun had said was accurate, and they both knew it. The federal files, Jae-hyun said. Kang's hands tightened on the table. How much did you give them? Enough to keep them interested, not enough to... How much? A pause. 18 months of transaction logs, communication routing for 4 of the regional distribution networks, 3 operational planning documents from the Busan expansion. The Busan expansion. 18 months of transaction logs. If the task force had that material, they had enough to move when they chose to. Kang had handed them a loaded instrument and left the decision of when to fire it entirely to the calculation of people whose interests were not Jae-hyun's. You handed a federal investigation the trigger to my organization, Jae-hyun said, and then you embedded yourself in the merger structure so that when it fired, you'd be on the right side of it. Kang looked up. His eyes were the eyes of a man who has made his calculation and is past the point of revision. The organization was changing regardless. I made sure I had a position in what it was changing into. That's not betrayal, that's survival. You did it to my organization, my people, my structure. It was never going to be only yours. A flash of something in Kang's face, not guilt, something harder than guilt. The bedrock of a decision fully made. You built it like it would last forever. Nothing lasts forever. I planned for what came next. Jae-hyun stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. He straightened his coat. He looked at the federal liaison. Whatever he's told you, he said, has a reciprocal. Every document he provided, I can provide the context that changes what it means. Every transaction log has a corresponding legitimate instrument. You know that. He paused. And you know that whatever arrangement you've made with a man who betrayed his principle is worth exactly what that man's word is worth. Think about that on your way home. He looked at the attorney. Tell the Yoon family that Clause 31, subsection F of the merger document is being withdrawn. I'll be sending revised terms in the morning. If there's a conversation to be had about the alliance, we'll have it on accurate terms. If there isn't, that's information I need before tomorrow. He looked at Kang last. Kang was looking back at him. The composure was fully gone now. What was underneath it was not panic. It was something more complicated, something that might have been, at its base, a kind of sorrow. 8 years. Jae-hyun saw it and did not let himself feel it and looked away first. Don't be in Seoul when I call back, he said. He walked out. Git. The drive back to the tower took 19 minutes. He spent them on the phone. He called his primary attorney, a woman named Cho, who answered at 2 in the morning without audible irritation because she had been doing this for 11 years. He told her to prepare a withdrawal notice for Clause 31 and all related subsections effective immediately, and to file a formal review request with the Merger Oversight Board flagging undisclosed conflicts of interest in the governance structure. Cho said, "This will delay the wedding." "Yes." A pause. "Delay or cancel?" "I don't know yet." "The Yoon family will respond." "I know." Jae-hyun. Her voice shifted slightly, a degree of personal she rarely allowed. If you do this without a clear successor strategy for the governance gap, the organization is exposed. The federal investigation, I know about the federal investigation. All of it? Enough. Another pause. What do you need from me? Everything I just described, clean and filed before 9 a.m. And a call to the Singapore firm pulling authorization access for Kang Do-yoon's credentials, effective immediately, backdated to 72 hours ago. Backdating will require, I know what it requires. Do it. He ended the call. He called Baek. Kang is leaving the Gangnam establishment. Let him go. I want surveillance only, no contact. A pause. The federal liaison who is with him. I want to know everything about his independent communication in the last 48 hours, not through official channels. Yes, sir. And Baek. I need one more thing. The complete file on Serin's independent network. Everything your team has mapped. Send it to my personal device, not the organizational system. A longer pause. You're moving against the Yoon family. I'm moving against a specific arrangement. Whether that becomes the family depends on how they respond. He put the phone away. The tower came into view through the windshield, all lit glass and dark steel, 43 floors of an empire built over a decade. He looked at it the way you look at something when you're not sure what it means anymore. Twat. He was at his desk at 3:30 when his phone lit up with Serin's name. He looked at it for 2 full rings. Then he answered. You met with Kang, she said. No greeting. Yes. And you spoke with our attorney. Your father's attorney. Yes. A silence. In it, he could hear the specific quality of her thinking, the recalibration, the reassessment, the rapid calculation of what he knew and what it meant for the architecture she had been building. You found the clause, she said. Your people embedded it well. It took me 40 minutes. It was my father's structure, not mine. And the operation against Naya, the silence had a different quality now. Kang identified her as a risk variable, Serin said. I was informed. I didn't disagree. You didn't disagree. She knew too much. She would have been a problem. She was an assistant. She was not a problem. She was a person you had removed because she was observant, and you needed the organization blind to what was happening inside it. His voice stayed even. He had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing he could do in a confrontation was lose the flatness. You used a dead woman's child as a mechanism. You should know that I know that specifically. A long silence. What do you want? Serin said. The first time in their entire relationship that he had heard something stripped from her voice. The performance layer, the calibration. What was left underneath was not warmth, but it was real. A person, not a strategy. I want to know what you are actually building, he said. not the cover story, the actual goal. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, lower, stripped of the social architecture she maintained the way other people maintain physical fitness, constantly, as a matter of survival. My father has been managing the alliance with your organization for 6 years, she said. In that time, he has made every major structural decision. I have been the instrument of those decisions. The marriage was his design. I agreed to it because I had no better option. A pause. The governance structure was also his design. He intends to absorb your organization into Yoon Holdings within 3 years of the merger. Gradually, using the board composition and the leadership provisions as levers. And your role in that? I was supposed to manage the transition from inside, be the face of continuity while the actual authority transferred. She said it without visible emotion. I did not design this. I was positioned into it the way you were positioned into it, with less information and less choice. He sat with this. It was plausible. It was also exactly what a very intelligent person would say in this position to create maximum ambiguity. Kang, he said, did you know about the federal files? A pause that was 1 second too long. No, she said. Se-rin. Another pause. I knew he had a relationship with the investigation. I didn't know the scope. You knew he was feeding them material. I knew he had an insurance arrangement, a dead man's switch. My father knew too. Her voice was flat now, the way ice is flat. Surface tension, everything underneath. We didn't know the volume. If we had, we wouldn't have... You built an operation on a man you knew was feeding a federal investigation. We had leverage over what he fed them, we thought. You thought? He almost laughed. Didn't. You built the entire architecture of this merger on a man with a federal relationship and thought you had leverage over it. Yes. A beat. We were wrong. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. The office was silent. Outside, Seoul was doing its 4 a.m. thing, the deepest quiet of the night, the hour just before the delivery trucks started and the city remembered it was a city. The wedding is tomorrow, Se-rin said. I know. If you pull the merger terms, my father will move. He has political relationships that I know what your father has. He will use them. I know. Then you know you can't simply withdraw and walk away. There are consequences that... Se-rin. He said it quietly. I know the consequences. I've known the consequences since I read Beck's report. I'm telling you that I'm moving anyway. Another silence, longer this time. Because of her, Se-rin said. He didn't answer. She's an assistant, Se-rin said. She's a woman with a sick child and no particular power and no structural relevance to anything you're trying to protect. You're going to burn an 8-year alliance and expose your organization to federal pressure because of a woman who resigned and has never asked you for anything. That's right, he said. The silence on the line was complete. You're serious, she said. I've been serious about very few things in my life, he said. This is one of them. He heard her breath. Just once, a single exhale that was not quite composed, the first genuinely unguarded sound he had ever heard from her. Then we have nothing else to discuss, she said. Not tonight. She ended the call. He put his phone down and sat in the silence of his office at 4 a.m. and felt the weight of what was coming settle across his shoulders like something he had chosen to carry, because he had chosen it. That was the thing. Every previous weight in his life had been assigned to him, by circumstances, by the logic of the organization, by the requirements of survival. This one he had picked up himself. He didn't sleep. He worked through the night. The attorney calls, the document preparation, the counterintelligence moves that needed to be in place before the Yoon family's people arrived at their offices in the morning. He was thorough and systematic, and he did not allow himself to think about the personal dimensions of what he was doing, because the personal dimensions were the kind of thing that needed to be held separately from the operational ones, or they contaminated each other. At 6:47 in the morning, his phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. He answered. Mr. Seo. A man's voice. Older, controlled, the voice of someone accustomed to being listened to. This is Yoon Dae-jung. He had never spoken directly with Se-rin's father. In 6 years of alliance, all communication had gone through intermediaries. That was by design. Plausible deniability for both sides. the standard architecture of powerful men who needed to be able to claim they had never directly discussed certain things. The fact that Yoon Dae-jung was calling him personally at 6:47 in the morning told him everything he needed to know about the man's current state. "Chairman Yoon," he said, "I understand you've been making calls." The older man's voice was precise and cold in the way of someone who has not raised his voice in many years because he has never needed to. "I want to discuss what you think you've found before you do something that cannot be undone." "It's already being undone," Jae-hyun said. A pause. "You should be careful about the decisions you make in the next few hours. There are parties with material interests in the outcome of today who are not patient people. Is that a threat? It's a description of the environment." A beat. "The federal investigation has a timeline. It will move with or without our cooperation. The question is whether you are inside the structure when it moves, with protection or outside it." Jae-hyun stood up. He walked to the window. The city was coming alive in the early light, gray and gold. The river catching the first of the morning, everything sharp-edged and cold. "You built a governance structure designed to absorb my organization," he said. "You placed a man inside my operation to facilitate it. You used my own financial instruments to remove a person who might have noticed, and now you're offering me protection." He paused. "From what you engineered. From what exists regardless of who engineered it." Yoon's voice was patient. The patience of someone who has been the most powerful person in every room for 40 years. "The wedding is at 3 o'clock. The guests are already—" His other phones, the personal device, not the organizational line, lit up. A message from a number he knew immediately. He looked at it. "Zuri is in the hospital. She collapsed at 6 this morning. ICU. Please come." The air left the room. "I have to go," he said. "Seo. He ended the call. He was already moving, coat in hand, toward the elevator, the phone against his ear calling Hyun-soo, the city outside the window blazing up gold and cold in the morning light. And somewhere across that city a small girl with her dead mother's eyes was in an intensive care unit, and the woman who had carried everything alone for 14 months was sitting outside it. And he was on the 43rd floor of a building that suddenly felt like... He was on the 43rd floor of a building that suddenly felt like a cage he had built for himself and called it an empire. The elevator took 19 seconds to reach the basement. He counted them. His mind did that in moments of extreme pressure. Broke time into countable units, something to hold on to while everything else moved too fast to grip. 19 seconds. Hyun-soo had the car running. Jae-hyun got in and said the hospital's name and said it fast, and Hyun-soo pulled out of the garage without a word, the way he always did, the way he had done for 8 years. And for a moment, Jae-hyun was grateful for the specific reliability of a man who simply drove when driving was what was needed. He called Nia. She answered on the first ring. "Tell me," he said. Her voice was controlled in the way it got when control was costing her everything. "She woke up at 5:30, couldn't breathe properly. I called the ambulance." A pause. Just half a second, but he heard the thing inside it. "Dr. Park is with her. They're stabilizing. He said it's a fluid complication from the treatment cycle. It happens sometimes," he said. "He said it happens, and they know how to handle it. I'm 12 minutes out. You don't have to—" "Nia." A silence. "Okay," she said, very quietly. He kept the phone in his hand after she hung up. Looked at it. Yoon Dae-jung had left no voicemail. Serin had sent nothing. His attorney Cho had sent 3 messages about the filing timeline, which he read and did not respond to, because the filing timeline was not the thing that mattered in this particular minute. Outside the window, Seoul moved past in the early morning light. Shopkeepers pulling up gates, the first buses running, people moving with the heads-down purposefulness of a city starting its day. He had driven through the city 10,000 times and had never noticed how many of the people in it were moving with that particular quality of exhaustion that meant they had been up all night for reasons that had nothing to do with work. He noticed it now. The ICU waiting area on the 6th floor was smaller than the regular pediatric waiting room. 4 chairs against a wall, a window that looked at another building's concrete face, a water dispenser that made a sound every 40 seconds. Nia was in the second chair from the left. She was still in the clothes she had slept in, a sweatshirt and dark pants. and her hair was pulled back with something that was not a hair tie. A rubber band, maybe. The specific improvisation of someone who had been woken at 5:30 in the morning and had not had time to think about anything beyond getting to the hospital. She looked up when he came through the door. He sat down next to her, not across from her. Next to her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, because that was the thing that felt right, and he was done, in this particular moment, making decisions based on what felt strategic. "How long?" he said. Dr. Park said another hour, maybe 90 minutes. She was looking at the ICU door, a heavy door, pale blue, with a small wire-reinforced window at eye level. She was asking for her elephant when they took her in. He remembered the elephant, the one that was in charge but didn't tell anyone. "They let her take it," Nia said. "One of the nurses, Jong, the one who always—" She held Zuri's hand and told her the elephant could come in, and Zuri said okay. A pause. She said okay like she was doing them a favor. Something shifted in his chest. He looked at the ICU door and let it shift. They sat in the particular silence of people who have said every practical thing there is to say and are now simply present, which is its own kind of language. After a while, Naya said, without looking at him, "Yoon Dae-jung called me this morning." He went still. 20 minutes before Zuri collapsed. "My personal number." She paused. "He said he understood I had a complicated relationship with his future son-in-law's organization. He said he wanted me to know that under the new governance structure, there would be a place for someone with my skills, that the past difficulties I'd experienced would be remedied. He was offering you a position. He was trying to find out what I knew and whether I was a problem." She said it without heat, factual. "He was very polite about it." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I wasn't interested in positions. I told him to have a good morning." A pause. Then my phone rang, and it was the ambulance dispatcher. He looked at the side of her face. She was still watching the door. In profile, she looked older than 31. Not older in a diminished way, but in the way of someone who has carried real weight, and the weight has settled into the structure of her face, become part of it. "I need to tell you what happened last night," he said. She turned to look at him then. He told her. All of it. Beck's report, the Gangnam restaurant, Kang's confession, the clause in the merger documents, the call with Se-rin, the call with Yoon Dae-jung at 6:47 in the morning. He told it the way he told things when he was being precise, sequentially, without softening, without the editorial adjustments he usually made to protect operational detail. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Kang," she said. 8 years. "Yes." He seemed... She stopped, reconsidered. "He always seemed like he was exactly what he presented. I used to think that about him, that he was the most legible person in the building." "So did I." "The legible ones," she said, half to herself. "The legible ones are the ones who've practiced the longest." He had thought the same thing, sitting across from Kang in the Gangnam restaurant. Had not said it, because saying it would have been, in some way, an admission of his own failure of perception. "The merger," Nia said. "You withdrew the clause." "My attorney filed the withdrawal at 7 this morning. The Yoon family is aware. They'll retaliate. Yes. The federal investigation, is real. And the material Kang gave them is real. And I have attorneys working on the contextualization strategy now." He paused. "It's not going to be clean. There will be consequences. The organization will be exposed in ways that require significant restructuring. Some of it will be ugly." She nodded slowly. Processing. "And the wedding?" He looked at her. "It's at 3 o'clock, she said. "I know because I spent 4 weeks managing the logistics before I resigned." "I know. Are you going?" "I'm here," he said. She held his gaze for a moment, then she looked back at the door. "You can't just—" she started. Stopped. "You can't make a decision this size because a child is in the ICU and you're running on no sleep, and I made the decision last night," he said, "before I knew about Zuri. I called Se-rin at 2 in the morning and withdrew from the arrangement." Silence. "She knows," he said. "Her father knows. My attorney has the documentation. The decision was made before I got your message this morning." She absorbed this. He watched it move through her. the sequence of implications, each one landing in order. When she spoke again, her voice was different, lower. Something underneath the control that was not quite composed. "You burned it down," she said. "I restructured it." "You burned it down," she said again. And this time it was not quite an accusation, not quite awe, something between both. "Yes," he said. "I did." The water dispenser made its sound. Down the hall a cart moved. The ICU door stayed closed and pale blue and impenetrable. "Why?" she said. He thought about the answer. He had thought about this answer for 3 days, turning it over the way you turn over something you found to see if it's what you think it is. He had tried several versions, the strategic version, the operational version, the version that framed it as a response to Kang's betrayal. None of them were wrong, exactly. None of them were the actual answer. "Because I spent 3 years seeing you work without seeing you," he said. "And when I finally saw you, I understood that everything I'd been building was built toward the wrong thing. Not wrong in a moral sense. Wrong in the sense of it was going to be finished one day and I was going to be standing at the top of it and there was nothing up there." He paused. "You make a home out of a second-floor apartment in Wangsimni with an elephant and bad faucet and a child who colors outside the lines. I've never made anything like that. I didn't know how. I'm not sure I know now, but I know I want to try." The silence that followed was long, not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that has weight and density, that means something is being decided inside it. "I'm going to need time," she said. "I know. I'm not," she exhaled. "I'm not someone who trusts quickly. You know that. You employed me for 3 years and I never told you anything about my life, which tells you something about how I'm built." "Yes. And you're not someone who... You've built your entire life around not needing people in this particular way." "Yes. That doesn't change because you decided it should." "I know." She looked at him. Direct, unsparing, the look she had given him across his desk 100 times when he brought her a problem and she was determining whether it was actually the problem or whether there was a different one underneath it. "You're going to have to be patient," she said. "I'm capable of patience," he said. "I'm not capable of pretending I don't know what I know." Something moved in her face. Very small. The particular thing that happened in her expression when she was deciding to let something through. "Go handle your organization," she said. "Come back when Zuri is out." Oh. He left the hospital at 8:20 and spent the next 4 hours doing the most controlled demolition of his professional life. The calls with his attorney were precise and sequential. The withdrawal of the merger clause triggered a formal dispute notification from Yoon Holdings' legal team within 90 minutes. Expected, managed, met with counter-documentation that Cho had prepared at 3 in the morning with the focused efficiency of someone who understood that the window for clean action was narrow. The federal investigation was the more complex problem. Jae-hyun met with his criminal defense counsel in a conference room at the Black Viper Tower at 9:30 and laid out what he knew. Kang's disclosure, the specific documents, the likely scope of the task force's current file. The attorneys were quiet in the way of professionals encountering a problem of genuine complexity. They asked questions. He answered them. By 10:15, they had a framework, proactive engagement with the task force through official channels, a contextualization strategy for the transaction records, and a restructuring proposal that would address the organization's most vulnerable operational exposure by converting it, not destroying it, converting it. There was a difference. He had spent 20 years building something, and while the shape of it was going to change significantly, permanently, the infrastructure was real. The logistics networks, the trade relationships, the financial instruments that were legitimate. Those things had value. Those things could be made clean. It would take time, and it would cost him things he had spent years accumulating, but it was possible. Kang had left Seoul. Beck confirmed it at 11:15. A flight out of Gimpo to Tokyo at 8:40 in the morning, booked the previous evening. Jae-hyun authorized Beck to track and document, but not to intercept. The man was no longer his problem in the way he had been. He was now a different category of problem, one that the legal process would address in its own slow, grinding way. At 12:40, he received a call from Se-rin. He answered. My father wants a meeting, she said. Her voice was the controlled voice she always used. He listened beneath it. When? This week. He's not irrational about this. He understands the governance clause was overreach. He wants to discuss what an actual partnership looks like. An actual partnership. Without the absorption structure. Without Kang. A pause. Without the marriage, apparently, since that's no longer... She stopped. Recalibrated. He's a pragmatist. If the alliance has value without the merger, he'll restructure it. If it doesn't, he'll move on. And you? A longer pause. I'm going to Jeju for a week, she said. After that, I don't know. Another pause. Something shifted slightly in her voice. Not much, just the surface tension of a feeling she was deciding not to suppress entirely. For what it's worth, the operation against her, the Kong arrangement, I should have said no. When I was told about it, I didn't disagree and I should have. She said it carefully, like she had been deciding whether to say it for several hours. That's not absolution. It's just accurate. I know, he said. Take care of the child, she said, and ended the call. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he put it in his pocket and looked at the city through the window. His city, the one he had spent a decade learning and maneuvering and surviving in, and thought about how much of what he thought he understood about it had been himself reflected back at him. He had read every angle of power within it and had missed entirely the angles that ran through the small apartments and hospital waiting rooms and worn sofas. Had missed the whole other city running parallel to the one he knew. He was going to have to learn it. He found he didn't mind. Petem. Dr. Park came out of the ICU at 1:17. Jae-hyun had returned at 1 o'clock, slipping back into the chair beside Nia without announcement. She had looked at him once, assessed whatever she needed to assess, and looked back at the door. They had sat in silence for 17 minutes, which was its own kind of ease. The ease of two people who had run out of performance for each other and found that what was underneath it was tolerable. More than tolerable. Dr. Park was a compact man in his 50s with the particular manner of pediatric specialists. Direct, but with a softness around the edges that you didn't find in the other specialties, something installed by years of talking to frightened families. The fluid complication has resolved, he said. Her vitals are stable. She's tired and a little annoyed about the IV, which I take as a good sign. He looked at Nia. She's asking for her elephant and for, he checked his notes, the wet man. Nia made a sound. It was not quite a laugh. It was something that started as a laugh and ran into something else on the way out. Something that had been compressed for a very long time and was releasing now in the specific way of things that release when the immediate crisis has passed, and the body realizes it has been holding itself together with pure will. She pressed her hand to her mouth. She turned away. He did not try to fix it. He did not say anything. He put his hand on her back, just his hand, flat between her shoulder blades, the pressure of someone present, and left it there while she got through it. It took about 40 seconds. Then she breathed out, long and slow, and her shoulders came down from where they had been, and she straightened. Can we see her? She said to Dr. Park. 5 minutes each. She needs to sleep. Zuri was smaller in the hospital bed than she was anywhere else. The machines made their sounds. The elephant was tucked under her arm with the practiced placement of a child who knew exactly where it needed to be. She looked at Jae-hyun when he came in with the direct evaluating look she always used, and then she said, without preamble, "You're here instead of your wedding." "Yes." "Auntie said you had a wedding today." "I did." "Did it get canceled?" "Yes." Zuri considered this. "Were you sad?" He thought about the answer honestly. "No," he said. "Okay," she said, apparently satisfied. She looked at the IV line in her hand with the focused displeasure of someone being inconvenienced. "This is annoying." "I know. It's going to leave a mark. Probably a small one." She looked back at him. "Are you going to keep coming to our apartment?" "If you'll have me." She thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. "You fixed the faucet," she said. "Yes." "And you got the groceries even when Auntie said not to." "Yes." "And you stayed in the waiting room." She paused. "Both times." "Yes." She nodded once, with the conclusive weight of a decision made. "The elephant says you can stay," she said. "She doesn't say that to everyone." He looked at the worn elephant under her arm. "Tell her I'm honored," he said. Zuri's mouth curved, small and real. "She knows," she said. "She figured you out a while ago." The nurse came to indicate his time was up. He stood, and Zuri was already closing her eyes, the medication pulling her toward sleep, the elephant firmly in place. He stood at the door for a moment and looked at her, this small person who had been used as a mechanism by people who saw leverage where they should have seen a child, who had survived it without knowing it, who colored outside the lines because she liked it better that way and had never once been told that was wrong. He turned and walked back to the waiting area. Nia was standing at the window that looked at the concrete face of the neighboring building. The afternoon light had changed while they were inside. It was past 2 now, the October sun already dropping, soul going amber at the edges. He came to stand beside her. Not close enough to crowd. Close enough. "She said the elephant approved me," he said. Nia's reflection in the window showed something that was almost a smile. "The elephant has high standards." "So I gathered." They stood there for a moment, looking at the concrete. The water dispenser made its sound. Down the hall, someone's visitor was laughing. A real laugh. Surprised out of them, the kind you can't manufacture. "I owe you 3 years of salary," he said. She turned to look at him. "When Kang engineered your resignation, you lost the income you would have earned. I'm aware that I can't, that money isn't the point, but it's a concrete thing, and it's owed, and I want to be clear that I understand that." She was quiet. "And Zuri's medical costs," he said, "from before the anonymous transfers, the 14 months before I found out. I want to settle that properly, through you, not around you, transparently." "Jae Hyun, I'm not buying anything," he said. "I'm paying what's owed. There's a difference." She looked at him for a long moment. The assessing look, the one that went all the way down to the bottom of a thing. "You're going to be very annoying to be around," she said finally. "Yes," he said, "because you're used to deciding things and then they happen. That's been my experience. It doesn't work like that. I'm beginning to understand that." She turned back to the window. "The apartment in Wangsimni is fine," she said. "I know you don't need anything. That's never been the question." He paused. "The question is what you want, which is a thing you're not accustomed to being asked." The silence stretched. Outside the window, the concrete face of the other building caught the last of the afternoon sun and went briefly gold. "Time," she said again. "That's still what I want. Time to... I've been in survival mode for 14 months. I don't know who I am when I'm not surviving." She paused. "I need to find that out before I can tell you anything else." "All right," he said. "That might take a while." "All right." She looked at him sideways. "You're not going to push?" "No." "Or arrange things? Or fix the next faucet without asking?" "I'll ask about the faucet," he said. Something broke open in her face then, quietly, without drama, the way light changes when a cloud moves. Not happiness exactly. Something more durable than happiness. The specific expression of someone who has been carrying a thing alone for a very long time and has just, for the first time, set part of it down. "There's a larger apartment," she said, "in the same building, second floor facing the river instead of the alley. The landlord mentioned it last month. It would be better for Zuri, more light, better ventilation for the treatments." He said nothing. "It's more expensive," she said. "Yes. I'm not asking you to pay for it. I know. I'm telling you it exists. I know," he said. "Thank you for telling me." She turned back to the window. He stood beside her and they watched the afternoon light work across the concrete until it faded and the corridor lights came on automatically, and the hospital resumed its evening rhythm around them. 4 months later, the apartment faced the Han River. It was not a large apartment. The kitchen was small and the second bedroom that was Zuri's was smaller, and there was a drafty spot near the living room window that no amount of weather stripping had fully addressed. These were facts about the apartment that all 3 of its current occupants knew and had opinions about. Zuri's treatment scores had improved steadily through November and December. Dr. Park used the word trajectory in a way that meant something real. By February, the word he used was encouraging, and by the following March, he said carefully that the function numbers had stabilized at a level that opened certain options they had not previously been able to discuss. He said it to Nia with Jae-hyun in the room because by then it had become understood, not announced, not formalized, simply understood, the way things settle into truth gradually, that he was part of the conversations that mattered. Zuri called him by his name now. She had done so for the first time in November, unprompted, in the middle of a conversation about something entirely unrelated. She had said it the way you say someone's name when it has stopped being a decision and become simply a fact. He had not made a thing of it, neither had she. They had continued the conversation. Nia went back to work in January, not for the organization, for a logistics consulting firm that operated at the intersection of corporate and governmental trade, the kind of firm that valued exactly the skills she had and knew how to use them legally. It was less money than she had made before. She worked reasonable hours. She was home for Zuri's treatments and for dinner on most evenings. She was finding out who she was when she was not surviving. He watched this from a respectful distance and from an unreasonable closeness simultaneously, because she had never formally invited him and had never asked him to leave, and the space between those two things was where he had learned to live. The organization restructured. It took longer than his attorneys had initially projected and cost more than he had initially calculated, both of which were entirely predictable and had been predicted. The federal investigation engaged with the proactive disclosure process and moved slowly, as federal investigations always did. 2 of the regional distribution networks were wound down. Several relationships with political contacts were severed or renegotiated on terms that were less useful. The shape of what remained was smaller and cleaner and considerably less powerful in the ways he had spent 20 years measuring power. He found that he minded this less than he had expected. Yoon Dae-jung requested the meeting he had promised. They had it in February, in a room that was neutral territory. A hotel conference room in Itaewon, no ceremony, 4 people in total, including the attorneys. It was a practical conversation about what a legitimate trade alliance looked like without the absorption architecture and without Kang, who was managing his own legal situation from a remove that was keeping him too occupied for other things. The conversation was uncomfortable and inconclusive and resulted in a follow-up meeting scheduled for April. That was, Jae-hyun thought, an acceptable outcome for a first conversation between people who had recently tried to dismantle each other. Kang Do-yoon cooperated with the federal investigation in exchange for considerations his attorneys negotiated. The documentation he provided about the offshore structure was accurate. He had always been accurate. That had been the thing about him. And the process of working through its implications was the bulk of what Jae-hyun's legal team spent the year managing. It was what it was. He did not spend energy on the anger, which had been real and had burned and had faded into something more useful. A clear-eyed understanding that the people you trusted most were the ones who could hurt you most specifically, and that this was not a reason not to trust people, but a reason to pay attention to them in ways he had previously not bothered to. He had started paying attention to people in ways he had previously not bothered to. This was difficult and inefficient and occasionally the most important thing he had learned. On a Tuesday evening in April, Jae-hyun sat on the floor of the apartment with his back against the couch and watched Zuri arrange her coloring supplies with the systematic precision she brought to all organization tasks. The elephant was in its place, on the left side of the coffee table, positioned to observe but not interfere. The river was visible through the window, the Han catching the last of the evening light. Nia was in the kitchen. She was on the phone with Dr. Park's office, scheduling the quarterly review. He could hear her voice through the open door, calm, specific, asking the right questions in the right order. The voice she used when she knew what she was doing. Zuri looked up from her supplies. She held up a drawing, completed at school, according to the date in the corner written by her teacher. It was a house. A large house with a door and 4 windows and 2 irregular shapes in the windows that were, he understood after a moment, people looking out. "That's good," he said. "That's us," she said, with the complete absence of self-consciousness that she deployed as a kind of superpower. "You're the one on the left. You're taller in real life, but I ran out of space." He looked at the figure on the left. She had given it a dark coat. "Who's in the other window?" he said. "Auntie." She set the drawing down. "And me. But I'm between you because that's where I usually am." He looked at the drawing for a long moment. "Can I keep this?" he said. She considered it. "I was going to give it to Auntie." "I could get a copy made." Another consideration. The serious face she made when weighing options. I'll make another one, she said. A better one, where you're taller. She picked up a crayon. This one's yours. He picked up the drawing, looked at it. The uneven house, the two figures in the windows, the impossible optimism of the image, the way it simply assumed that everyone it depicted belonged where it had placed them. From the kitchen, Nia's voice finishing the call, the sound of the phone being set down, the sound of her moving to the doorway. He didn't look up immediately. He looked at the drawing for one more second. The house, the figures, the river just barely indicated by a blue line at the bottom of the page that Zuri had added without being asked because she liked the view and wanted it in the picture. Then he looked up. Nia was leaning in his kitchen doorway, watching the two of them with an expression that she was not, for once, managing. It was the unguarded version of her face, the one that existed when she had used up the last of the performance, and what was left was simply what was there. Something steady, something that had been through the specific kind of fire that burns away everything unnecessary and leaves only what was real to begin with. Quarterly review is scheduled, she said. Good, he said. She wants to show you the drawing, Zuri said, without looking up. I can see it from here, Nia said. It's better up close, Zuri said. Nia pushed off the doorframe and came into the room. She sat on the couch, not the floor, the couch, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her beside him. She looked at the drawing in his hands. She made me taller in the original, he said. She said you ran out of space. I did, Zuri confirmed, still coloring. Nia looked at the drawing for a moment. Then she looked at him, sidelong, the way she had been looking at him for 4 months. Not the full weight of it, not yet, but more every week, the door opening by degrees, the way trust moves when it's real. The river is a nice touch, she said. She added it herself. I know. Nia looked at the blue line at the bottom of the page. She likes the view. So do I, he said. She held his gaze. In it was everything that had not been said, and everything that had been said, and everything that still needed time, and he held it back without pressure, without demand. The patience he had told her he was capable of, and had then had to actually practice, which was different, which had required learning something new about himself at 41, which he was not going to pretend had been easy. Okay, she said, quietly. Not a resolution, not a declaration, just the word that meant here, this, now, the thing we are building, the direction we are going, the house with 2 figures in the window and the river at the bottom of the page. Okay, he said. Zuri looked up from her coloring. She looked at the two of them on either side of her. She looked at the elephant. She looked back down. Good, she said, with the complete satisfaction of someone whose plan has worked out, and went back to coloring outside the lines because she had always liked it better that way, and nothing about any of this was going to change that.